We are going to do the poem My Neighbor Friend Breathing His Last by Bullah Shah. Baba Bullah Shah, he was a Punjabi Sufi poet, humanist and philosopher. His full name was Sayyid Bullah Shah Qadri. He learnt a lot from his teacher and master Inayat Shah. He struggled hard to get inner knowledge. He used to say that spiritual progress lay in detaching one's mind from the world outside and attaching it to our Creator, God. His poetry is mainly concerned with the eternal life. He believed that human beings equally deserve the right to live a life of peace and dignity and harmony regardless of their complexion, their caste, creed or status. As a humanist, he was trying to provide solutions to the sociological problems of the world around him. He was the leading light of a rich Sufi tradition of Punjabi poetry that for many centuries. He spread the message of religious tolerance, communal harmony, liberalism, humanism and love. He is used the verse form of Kafi. Now Kafi is mostly used in Sindhi and Siraiki and Punjabi poetry. Now this poem, it is an effective poem presenting the reality of death. The poet is in deep state of sorrow at the death of a friend who is also his neighbor. His death has terrified the poet and he is shocked. This death has snatched away everything from his friend. It has left nothing behind, and the poet says that if a man loves God, he gets rid of the fear of death. Without God's love, a man is nothing here and hereafter. The central idea of this poem is the fear of death. The poet looks at his dying neighbor and thinks of death. Death is a great reality and it equals all. One day or the other a man dies. He does not think about anything and he has to pass through this eternal gate. And he leaves behind his mourning relatives. Everything which is charming and beautiful in this world becomes invisible as soon as one closes his eyes. But if a man loves God and has a desire to meet Allah, he gets rid of the fear of death. Desire for union with God frees him from the fear of death. For death is but a passing phase of life, a change of dress, a disrobing, a birth into the unborn again, a commencing where we ended, a starting where we stopped to rest, a crossroad of eternity, a giving up of something to possess all things, the end of the unreal, the beginning of the real. Edwin Liebfried has said so in The Song of the Soul. He says that mostly we are forgetful of our own death because there are so many worldly charms that they are luring us all the time. We are very busy in the worldly activities and we don't have any time to think about hereafter. We think that we are going to live forever. But the death of the dear ones, they remind us of the eternal life for some time. It shakes our hearts, but then we are lost again. Now we are going to look at the first stanza of the poem, My Neighbor Friend Breathing His Last. We will look at its words meaning and a little bit of explanation. Breathes one's last, to draw one's last breath. Aghast is terrified. Remain is to stay, stop. Companions are persons who accompany others. In the first stanza, the poet is talking about a friend who is dying And what are his own feelings at this particular occasion? His friend is breathing his last, and he is about to leave this world. The poet is very upset and sad, and he does not know how he can help his friend. He is afraid and wants to lengthen and prolong the life of his friend. He is himself frightened to see the death, because it makes him realize that he is also going to die at any moment. The poet is praying to God to help him in this difficult situation and to bear the loss of his friend. Although he knows that his friend cannot stay more and he has to leave, he is still thinking of some miracle to make him stay in the world. The poet is telling us that death is inevitable and no one can escape it. Our love and affection for our dear ones makes us grieved over their departure from the world. Sooner or later, everyone has to go to their Creator and to the altar of death. The poet wails that no tear and no prayer can stop this coming death. His friend is a dying person and he cannot stay here in the world anymore. His friend has to leave all his companions at every cost and catch the train taking him to the world hereafter. Thou know'st 'tis common all that lives must die, passing through nature to eternity. The second stanza of the poem, My Neighbor Friend Breathing His Last. Decamp, the first difficult word in this stanza, means going away secretly, and shrieks, they are screams or cries. The poet is saying that it is very hard to bear the loss of someone going away from us, and particularly if that person is close to us, this grief becomes unbearable, but we have to face it. His friend is on his deathbed and breathing his last, but all the people present there are talking about his departure from the world. Some are expressing their grief through weeping and crying. The poet seeks God's help to make him bear this grief and loss. While expressing his condition, the poet exclaims that every place seems to him full of cries, screams, moans and groans, like there is a total picture of sadness around him. The poet shows his helplessness and asks Allah for his help. He tells us about man's helplessness before death, as it is true that the decree of God cannot be averted by man. Third stanza of the poem, My Neighbor Friend Breathing His Last. Flare up, the one difficult word, it means burst into bright flame. Visible to be in sight, charming is pleasant. Now death, as the poet says, it is unavoidable and it is very difficult to bear it. When someone who is dear to us dies, we get terrified and we start thinking of our own death, of our own end, and it adds more to our grief. When we lose someone, we find that life has lost all its charm. Everything looks dark, gloomy and unattractive. In this situation, we can do nothing except praying to Allah. And Allah consoles us and gives us some kind of relief. The poet is talking about his inner feelings and the absence of his friend. He says that there is a kind of fire in his heart. The scene of the death of his dear friend is unbearable for him. He finds darkness everywhere in the absence of his friend. He finds no attraction in any scene in any sight around him in this world. The world has lost color, has lost its meaning for him. And the poet is feeling hopeless and dejected at the death of his beloved friend. The world's an inn, and death the journey's end. We are going to look at stanza 4 of the poem, My Neighbor Friend Breathing His Last. In loss, suffering loss of something, dwell is to live. The poet says that all the losses in life can be borne only if we love our Creator. He says that if he has not the love of God, he will not be able to bear the losses in this world and in the next world. He is in a fix what to do as he has lost his friend, and he is terrified and afraid. He asks what he should do. The answer is that he should love his Creator, love God, to overcome all his fears and losses. The God's love is everything for him. As a mystic, he gives philosophy of oneness. He says that he cannot live without becoming one with the love of God. The poet cannot even think of living without Allah. He feels the presence of God inside and outside. The poet has described the truth of life. His heart is filled with the light of God. A jewelry box is only valuable when there is jewelry in it. Otherwise, it is just a box. Similarly, the heart will only be valuable if love for Allah Ta'ala is in it. Otherwise, it is just a piece of flesh.